Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of The Brand Called You. I'm your host, Aditi Kumar, and today I have the opportunity to bring to you a very special guest, Ashutosh Garg. Yes, the tables seem to have turned this time around, and the person you've seen as a host in hundreds of earlier episodes on this channel been invited to occupy the guest chair today. So welcome, Ashutosh.
Thank you,
Uh,
Aditi. It's a pleasure to be with you and looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, likewise, Ashutosh. Ashutosh needs no introduction. In fact, when I was going through his biography, I was taken in by the diverse range of professional experience that spans over 45 years. And I'm just going to attempt to capture some of the highlights from there. Starting on, Ashutosh has worked for in the corporate sector for about 25 years. He worked for ITC Limited for 17 years and then left the company when he was a managing director for one of the ITC group companies based out of Singapore. He then went on to spend 8 years in the aerospace industry as the head of the Asian operations. His professional career took a very interesting turn when he left his corporate journey to found Guardian Pharmacy in 2003, and he grew it to the second largest pharmacy chain in India with over 200 stores. He exited Guardian in 2016. Ashutosh now is a certified business and executive coach. He coaches and mentors several CEOs across the world on business matters, governance, strategic planning, succession planning, and several other people and culture related issues. In January 1995, he was also recognized as Global Leader of Tomorrow by the World Economic Forum, Switzerland. He also dons the hat of the author, and he has written 9 highly acclaimed bestsellers on a variety of themes related to business and life. In fact, his 10th book, The Power of Saying No, is scheduled for release by end of this year. Ashutosh writes regularly for various online publications like Times of India, Business Insider, Business World. And his new and very interesting role as a storyteller, Ashutosh hosts a successful video and podcast show called The Brand Called You, which is what you're watching right now. And there are some staggering numbers there. He has interviewed over 2,900 people from over 65 countries around the world. Also, a very keen golfer, a doting husband. He plays Indian flute, a parent, and now also a grandparent. So, once again, welcome, Ashutosh.
Thank you.
I just want to start by asking how does it feel to be in the guest chair of this particular podcast where you've been a host many, many
Uh,
times?
Aditi, it's always fascinating to listen to such amazing people from around the world. And as you were reading out, my profile, I must say, I was also struck with the similar imposter syndrome, saying that is this really me you are talking about? But it's always a pleasure to talk about one's own journey because, as one says about an author, everyone has a book in them. Similarly, everyone has some part of their journey which is very fascinating. So I'm quite excited to be sitting with you talking about my journey, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Wonderful, wonderful, Ashutosh. And as I often tell you that it's an occupational hazard of my own profession of being a leadership coach, etc., that I'm deeply interested not just in the outward achievements that the world gets to see, but also the inner journey of leaders. And that's going to be largely the theme or the arc that my questions will take. So, how do you feel about that?
I'm delighted to be able to share. I've had a fascinating life. I've also had a life which has had its own shares of amazing ups and amazing downs. So
Yeah.
I'm happy to share whatever
Yes.
questions you want to ask me.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for that. So just to get started, as I, you know, everybody knows you've had a very inspiring life. In fact, we can safely say that you're somebody who has been there, done that, seen it all. If you were to filter through your experiences of so many years, what would you say that what has life been all about, both from a business lens and a personal lens?
Okay. So, Adi, let me start from the very beginning. You know, I'm from a middle class family. My father was a very highly decorated soldier, brigadier. When I say decorated, he is one of the few Kirti Chakra awardees. and an Ati Vishesh Seva Medal. Grew up in a normal middle class home, and like most Indians, the focus was always education. Uh, today's I see our children and my granddaughter, and the focus is to do many other things. But I'm 69 now, and I don't ever remember thinking that why don't I take a break or a sabbatical. uh, I've
Hmm.
changed three
Hmm.
jobs, and in each of the jobs my whole focus was end at 5 p.m. in the evening and start the next morning at 9 a.m. in a new company, because the whole concept of taking a break didn't exist.
Yeah.
So life has been good. I mean, 17 years with ITC. I was fortunate to have got some incredible exposure. Um, the first Indian chairman of ITC was Ajit Haksar, who brought in the concept of a professional entrepreneur. And I can never forget the word preneurial, which was a professional entrepreneur that he had coined. And I was, well, ITC in those days was probably one of the most fertile grounds for young people to demonstrate their own entrepreneurship capabilities. Um, I was involved with many diversifications. But before that, there's a very interesting story of how, uh, and this is a story I've often said. I was all of 23 years old, 1.5 years in ITC, and I was told that you have been transferred to Aurangabad,
Okay.
to a hotel. I used to have a scooter in those days, one suitcase. I said, okay. So I put my bag on my scooter, drove out to the Delhi railway station, and went and asked the ticket person, to say, give me a ticket to Aurangabad. And the person asked me, which Aurangabad? I said, what do you mean, which Aurangabad? She said, well, there's one Aurangabad in Maharashtra, one in Uttar Pradesh, and one in Bihar. Which one do you want to go to? I said, I don't know. So I got on my scooter, came back to the head office, and I said, which Aurangabad are you sending me to? And they said, go to Maharashtra. And
Okay.
that's how I ended up in Aurangabad, Maharashtra. But the reason I'm giving you this story is that in those days, whatever the company said uh, had to be done was done without any questions asked.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then and then that paid a lot of amazing dividends in future.
Hmm.
Later on, when I was in my mid 30s, Mr. Sapru, who was the chairman of ITC then, called me and said that the board has decided we need to open a beachhead in Singapore, and you're the first person being sent overseas. Now I'm talking of 88. Very few Indians used to go overseas in those days.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I said, sir, thank you very much. What is my mandate? And he looked at me, smiled, and said, I don't know. So, I said, sir, but you're sending me there at a high cost to the company. What will I do? He thought a little, opened his drawer, took out his letterhead, signed at the bottom, and a blank sheet of paper. He said, go and write your own mandate. Right? Now, for someone who was 35, 36 years old, it was frightening and yet an amazing opportunity. And we built a $250 million company. So,
Wow.
these are amazing opportunities that have been presented to me, and yet at the same time, when I moved into aerospace, I ran Asia for two large American aerospace companies, launched two huge satellites, which were an amazing opportunity to learn. And in 2003, I was traveling 22, 23 days a month till I reached a stage when in March 2003, I suddenly, was in six different countries in 7 days. And I remember this so distinctly. March of 2003, I was lying in bed at 6 a.m. in the Grand Hyatt in Seoul, my head on my pillow, looking at the ceiling, and I couldn't remember which country I was in. So I remember calling my wife and saying, I think it's time to leave my job because I can't continue like this. And I
Hmm.
came back, resigned. Didn't know what I was going to do. And my first book that I wrote, and I'm sure we'll talk about the book sometime, but my first book that I wrote, The Buck Stops Here, I said I woke up on the 1st of April 2003 without a job, without an assistant. My MS Outlook calendar was absolutely empty. And I realized I had joined the ranks of the educated unemployed. Right? And these are all facts of my life that I've written down.
Yes. Yes.
But my learnings from all these have been that one, I have lived life the way I wanted to. I wouldn't have done it any other way. The second is that I've always been a great believer in following whatever is the corporate hierarchy policy without trying to be a rebel.
Yeah.
And yet I've been a very passionate risk taker, if I can use that phrase. So
Yeah,
that's a
yeah.
quick summary of what I've been
Yeah,
doing.
yeah. No, wonderful, wonderful, Ashutosh. What a fascinating journey. And the fact that you were able to bring in these stories, I think that itself brings the whole thing to life for me. And what really stands out for me, Ashutosh, is the fact that ITC gave you a very entrepreneurial culture where you were
Correct.
going and the blank sheet of paper which is signed and given to you, and you're pretty much setting your own mandates, and I'm sure you're holding yourself to a really high standard and all of
Absolutely.
that. But at the same time, the implicit trust which is there,
Correct.
placed by you in the system, right? Like we are chosen to play in an arena and we are going to give it 100% trust.
Correct.
And what then that opens up for us, and that, rest is history, right? We know
Absolutely.
how all of that turned out. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
so yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, just moving on, another thing that I had in mind to explore with you was around the belief systems that we grow up with in our impressionable years, through our parents, through our caregivers. There are a lot of these belief systems that we imbibe, um, directly or indirectly. And as we navigate through life, we also realize that, hey, some of them are really holding us in good stead. And we also realize that maybe some of them are not. So
Mm.
I was very curious to know that in your journey, the belief systems that you grew up with, how much of that came in handy throughout? And was there anything that you said, you know what, like maybe I need to discard this? So anything there?
Yeah, so I think a lot of beliefs, Aditi, come from the time when you were very young. And so I'm going to get back to again to my parents. My mother was probably one of the very early graduates from Lady Irwin College in English, and yet she had a very good learning of the scriptures. So, I remember sitting with her and my grandparents and listening to stories of the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Gita, and so on. And that has really stayed with me right through. And I've really learned much, much more. And I'll talk a little more about that. But my father was probably one of my closest friends, right till he passed away in 2014 when he was 87. And I mean, I used to speak to him almost every single day. And once we moved back to Gurgaon, Delhi, I'd go and have lunch with him every alternate day in Delhi. Uh, there's certain things that I have always remembered from him. For example, one thing he always told us, we were three brothers. He would always tell us that in the morning when you are shaving, if you can look at yourself in the eye and say, yesterday I did not knowingly do anything wrong and or knowingly harm anyone, that is the only justification you ever need to give to yourself. The world will keep talking about what you are doing, what you're achieving. People will try to bring you down. But as long as you are strong in your own mind that you did not do anything wrong, that's all that matters. The second
Wonderful.
thing which he said to me, and these are all values or beliefs I have passed on to both my sons, is, and he always said that no matter what you do, no matter what you do, to the outside world, you will have me standing in your corner, no questions asked. When you and I are alone, if you've done something wrong and I disagree, I may whip you. But that's between
Yeah,
you and me.
yeah.
But to the outside world, you're my son and you can do no wrong. And
Correct.
that was such an incredible amount of power that he would give to me whenever. And I ran into many problems in my life, but I knew that one person who was always standing in my corner was my father. So
Wow.
those are very, very powerful beliefs, values that we got from, and of course, like any other parent, the three things that we are all told, and I would say that we are all told, not just in India but all over the world: don't lie, don't steal, fear God.
Hmm, hmm, hmm.
Those are three things which I'm sure every parent gives, but I wanted to single out these two particular things
Yeah,
that I
yeah,
learned, and those were very, very important to me.
yeah.
Over the years, I'm not sure if I have discarded any beliefs, but my beliefs in Indic scriptures has deepened very significantly. So much so that in 2021 or 2021, during the COVID time, someone sent me a link from the Harvard Divinity School.
Okay.
And I ended up doing an 8-month program on the seven major religions of the world,
Oh,
which got me to understand uh, the seven religions, which
yeah.
is Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and then Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism. And the last four come from India, and therefore they're called Indic religions.
Okay.
And I
Okay.
have drawn extensively from these religions and from the scriptures in my last two books.
Okay. Okay.
So my beliefs have only got more and more strengthened, that there is so much to learn from our scriptures. A book that I keep by my bedside all the time is Chanakya's Arthashastra and Niti Shastra, and whenever I feel like I pick up a paper, open it anywhere, and there's something new to learn in it. So
Yeah.
that I would say it's been this holistic kind of a view that I've been able to craft a lot because of my own beliefs from my parents. There are one or two other interesting things that I've learned again when I'm in the younger days in ITC. Um, I used to be an executive assistant to a very senior American senior vice president who would come from Sheraton, and he taught me that if you don't blow your own trumpet, nobody else will.
Hmm. Hmm.
And as I've also written about this, that few years later I realized there was a sequel to that, which was that the original is don't blow your own trumpet and nobody else will. But the other sequel that I added on was don't blow it so hard that it starts to hurt people's ears. You know?
Good one.
So I've often said these things, and another thing that I again was a belief learning was what I call the bottom drawer principle. I was
Hmm.
always told that in those days we used to get physical mail,
Hmm.
and because I was his executive assistant, every copy that he didn't want to see would be put into a folder, and his secretary would come and hand it over to me, and there would be over 100 letters. And I one day I went and told him, I said, "How am I supposed to handle so many letters?" I think I was all of 26 or 27 years old. And he says, "Oh, follow the bottom dot principle." I said, "What is that?" He says that anything that you think is not relevant, just put it into the bottom drawer of your table.
Hmm.
And 1 month later, pick up all those and shred them. They're of no relevance. If it is important enough that someone has sent it, they will follow up. So I have
Okay.
followed this even today when there's no physical letters.
Right. Right.
Any email that I get goes into a junk folder. I
Hmm.
drag and drop it.
Hmm.
And 1 month later, if nobody has followed up, I just empty the folder. So, so they're very
Okay.
interesting learnings that I've
Yeah,
learned.
yeah. No, this is a very new one. Like, so
Mm,
I'm hearing about this one for the first time. Very, very interesting.
mm,
So, no, so Ashutosh, thank you for sharing that. And you know what really stands out for me is the first thing that you said about the couple of things that your parents did, right? Like how uh, the whole thing about you facing yourself and looking yourself in the mirror and actually being able to see the person that you would like to be and
correct,
reflecting on your previous day. Such
correct.
a simple thing, but something that can really, hold you strong in so many ups and downs of life, right? Like
Absolutely.
a ritual. And
Absolutely. And I do that every day this morning, even today.
yeah,
In
yeah,
the morning, when I'm
yeah,
shaving, I do reflect on yesterday
yeah,
and
yeah,
say, how was yesterday? It's just 2 or 3 minutes or 4 minutes,
yeah, yeah,
but it gives you a lot
absolutely.
of stability.
Absolutely, absolutely. And like for me, it's fascinating to know when I meet leaders like yourself and see all that you've achieved and what are those core things that would have really helped you. And this seems to be that, right? The way the values that your parents imbibed, or even the fact that, hey, I'm in your corner, and the confidence with which you show up in the world because you know that something very integral to you is in your
Correct.
corner, right?
Correct.
So it's thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you very, very much. Um, so I'm going to just shift gears a little bit, Ashutosh, and I'm going to little bit trace your career journey. You have made many, many transitions, so many diverse roles, from a corporate leader to an entrepreneur, from ITC to aerospace industry, then moving on to become a business coach, a speaker who's representing the country in so many different global forums, then author, and now a podcaster, storyteller. So through all these transitions, um, it almost seems like there are different identities. Your identity is growing or changing. What is the deepest sense of self that you carry with you today? When you look at yourself, then who is Ashutosh and what is that one core identity that remains untouched through all these transitions?
No, I think this is a great question, and I've been fortunate. I've often said that, my grandfather joined one government job and he retired with that government job. My father was in the army and then he spent a few years in the private sector. I've been more fortunate than a lot of others. But the way the world is going, young people today can afford to say that I'm going to be in the corporate sector for 10 years, then 5 years, I'm going to become a musician, then I'll go and act for 2 years, then I'll come back and become an entrepreneur, I'll take a sabbatical, I just want to be a golfer or any sports person. So today, the world affords so many more different opportunities for every young person. But uh, 2010, I remember this one amazing instance. I was releasing my first book, The Buck Stops Here, and I thought, my book has been released, and um, Omar Abdullah, who was the chief minister of
Yeah.
J&K in those days, he still is, and is a good friend, he came to release the book. And so a very high profile launch at the India International Center, etc., etc. At the end of that launch, I asked a very senior journalist. And I just assumed, I mean, I'd known him for 15, 17 years. I said, will you give me a good write up tomorrow? And he looks at me and he says, who's Ashutosh Garg? So I said, what do you mean, who's Ashutosh Garg? You've known me for so many years. He asked
Hmm.
me the same question again, who's Ashutosh Garg? So the third time he asked me, he clarified. He said, I know Ashutosh Garg, ITC Limited. I know Ashutosh Garg, Aerospace. I know Ashutosh Garg, Guardian Pharmacy. But who's Ashutosh Garg? And that is when I started to realize that most of us tend to assume that our own persona is greater than the organization that we work for. We forget that when we send in our visiting card for a meeting, the person is meeting us not because he's Ashutosh Garg, but because of the company that he is representing.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that is when you suddenly realize, when you understand this, you realize that it is you who has to get known
Yeah.
as a persona which is greater than the organization that you are working for. And therefore, that is when I really started to understand the whole concept of personal branding. That is when I said that I've got to start working on uh, the different aspects that I have been lucky enough to be in. The corporate sector we've spoken about. I've been an author. I've written my 10th book, as you said in the introduction. I've been there. My podcasting role really started because, I just felt that I wanted to build what I call the world's largest digital library of knowledge, experience, and wisdom. And I believe the brand Call You is the world's largest podcast now. But I've also been fortunate to have been invited to serve on the board of Gavi, the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization, which is the multilateral agency where, and that was just before I served on the board for 8 years before COVID. And that led to me to understand a lot about vaccination.
Hmm.
So, because I've had very, very many diverse opportunities to learn from so many different people, I
Yeah.
just see each one of them as huge value adds to me. And I just want to, I don't even once think that I wish I was not doing so much. So I just
Yeah.
keep on
Yeah.
adding on more and more stuff to my own knowledge.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, sure, absolutely, Ashutosh. And the common theme, knowing you for, the limited time that I have known you for and, our conversations, I feel that the underlying theme that I pick up is the learning spirit that you have, the way you're constantly challenging yourself to try new things. So I think for me, across all of this, this is a theme that emerges like somebody very curious, relentless, amazing learning spirit, even disciplined, like the way you're disciplined. And we'll talk about that also later. But I think all of this sort of becomes like a theme across all the different roles that you play.
Hmm. Thank you.
So yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I had another question in mind, which was a little bit more to do with focusing on our audience, who's also uh, from different ranges, right? We have senior leaders, we also have high potential talent who's really building themselves in their careers, etc. So I feel it will be very useful for them to know that when you reflect on these roles, as you said, the different hats that you don and roles you've played, in terms of capabilities, what do you feel that there are capabilities which have been common throughout these roles? Which are the qualities that you would say that, hey, like these are the five things that really made sure that I deliver on all of these equally effectively?
So, Aditi, I'm not sure if there's any commonality, but I'll tell you what my where, and this is where my beliefs have stood by me,
Sure.
because working in a company like ITC, where you have the comfort and the security of a very powerful organization,
Yeah.
which has the ability to forgive mistakes. Um, you know, it is something which was absolutely incredible, and I would always say that I am where I am because of my first 17 years with the people I worked with at ITC. 8 years in aerospace gave me an exposure to a technology at a time when not too much of the world was talking of technology.
Mm,
And to see these massive satellites, and just to give our viewers and listeners a perspective, one of these geostationary satellites is as big as a football field and as
oh.
big as a six-story house, weighing about 6 tons, which is, or 7 tons, which is shot up into space at 36,000 kilometers above Earth. So you can imagine the power and the technology that goes into sending all that. So that was a very humbling experience when you talk to such incredible minds who are building these amazing satellites and rockets. To becoming an entrepreneur, where uh, it was very, very humbling. I remember the first 5 or 6 people we had in the office. We were a tiny little office, and three of the ladies came to me and said, "Nobody has come to clean the toilet." And I said,
Mm,
"Don't worry." So I picked up a broom and went and cleaned the toilet myself because it had to be done, right?
mm,
And right through Guardian, every time I would walk into a store, if it was dirty, I would clean it myself.
yeah,
Now,
yeah,
um, these are all learnings that I have been through over the years.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I guess a common theme that has run through in all these roles is nothing, no role or job is big enough to warrant your saying that, oh, don't you know who I am? And the second thing is that what I used to always tell my young colleagues who would join us in Guardian, at one stage, Guardian had 1,200 employees.
Yeah.
I would always tell them that in retail, just make sure you do two things every morning when you get up and start to come out to work. Number one, take off your ego
Mm.
and hang it on the hook behind your bathroom door. And number two, take off your watch and leave it beside your bedside. There's no place for a watch or
Yeah.
your ego when you are in a retail environment.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
so, so therefore, these are all things that I have learned about,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that has resulted in my always telling people I always have time for whoever tells me, I want to speak. I say I'll find you the time.
Yeah.
I never
Yeah.
ever say that I don't have time. And
Yeah.
the second
Yeah.
thing that I've always told my children and all my nephews and nieces that I don't have the word tired in my dictionary. So, if I'm tired, I can rest, but there's no reason to keep saying I'm tired.
Mm, mm.
There's always time to do things,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there's always enough time in a day to meet as
Yeah.
many people as you would like to.
Yeah, yeah, no, wonderful, Ashutosh. And I think I can speak from my own experience of having interacted with you a few times. I think I have seen all of this in play, all that you said, making time, the humility, not tired. So I think whatever you're saying, for me, I was playing the episodes in my mind that, yes, of course, I have picked this up about him in our several
Thank you.
interactions. So I'm
Thank you.
sure that this is consistent and everybody who interacts with you would be able to say that about you. Um, I have a few more questions, so I'm just going to a little bit shift my energy to what's happening in the world today. Like we are hearing some really fascinating stuff, like for example, Nvidia has $5 trillion, has been valuated at $5 trillion recently. There is a growing fascination for unicorns which is happening. So it looks like financials somewhere have become a non-negotiable benchmark for success for organizations. And I'm not saying good or bad, but I'm just stating it that it has gone to another level altogether. I'm just very curious to know that for you who in your corporate career as an entrepreneur, how much of role did financials play, or did you also have another scorecard for yourself alongside, which helped you say that, yeah, I am successful?
So, Aditi, I would never say that finance is not important. Finance is always important. How much finance is entirely dependent on every individual.
Hmm,
To
hmm,
me, and I've often said that there is something that I've always said, every individual defines their own threshold. When I started working, aspiration was to get myself a small Maruti 800. You got that, it was to buy a small house. Managed to get that. So at every stage, there is something that our benchmarks keeps on changing on what you would like to have. And while it is important, I have never really been driven by the fact that someone has got so much more money than I do. When I started, I had never imagined that God would give me so much. But do I keep comparing myself to say that why am I not living in a home like that, or why am I not driving a car like that? And this, about 10, 12 years ago, someone told me an interesting story about Swami Vivekanand, who was in the US. He was taken to someone's place, and that guy was a multi-billionaire, and then he went someone else's place who had this massive land and cattle, and someone came and asked him that, so how did you feel meeting all these very, very wealthy people in America? And he's believed to have said that, well, it was wonderful meeting them, but when you look at me, I can just say I have enough.
hmm.
And his own definition was enough was very different from what someone else may be.
Yeah,
So I wouldn't say my definition is similar. I am conscious about what I do have,
yeah.
but am I constantly being driven by the fact that I must earn more or make more profit to achieve more? The answer is no. So
Hmm,
I'm driven more by the fact that, like the brand called You, it's not a commercial enterprise at all, not so far, because I said, let me build it as a digital library of knowledge, experience, and wisdom.
yeah.
And in everything that I have done, it has not been driven by anything to do with how much money will it make for me, but it has always been driven by what can I contribute and what can I learn.
Sure, sure. And so what I'm taking away from your answer is that success and happiness. So it's not just finances, but it has to be a combination of various things at play that would
Correct.
eventually lead to that whole feeling of, hey, I'm
Correct.
successful.
Correct.
And
Another thing that I also want to say is that, my wife, but both my sons have played a very major role. She's a well-known historian, well recognized, and both our sons are, one is in Singapore, one's in the US,
yeah,
and all three of them have never really demanded anything, other than what we have.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And both the boys are doing exceedingly well in their own careers. They have more than enough in their own lives. So
yeah.
I don't think financials is a major driver for any of us.
Sure, 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 Ashutosh. Thank you so much for sharing that. So I have in this thread, I have one last
Sure.
question, and then I have a couple of more quick questions for you,
Yeah.
but that will come after. One last question in this thread is that, having experienced so much and done so much, is there anything still that you feel that I don't know the answer to this one? There is a dilemma that I still carry, something that has the potential to keep you awake at night. What is that?
Um, I'm not sure if there's anything that keeps me awake because I'm a very, very good sleeper. I go to sleep at 9 o'clock in the evening. At night, I go to sleep the moment my head hits my pillow, but I'm up at 4 o'clock every morning. But I do want to explore a lot of our scriptures, and I'm doing a lot of
Hmm.
reading. I've got my new book, which you said was a book that is titled "The Power of Saying No," and
Yeah.
I've drawn extensively from our scriptures. I've got two new books that have gone for publication. One is a book that is titled "Learnings from a Parent," where again I have drawn extensively from our scriptures. After that, I've got another one coming on that is ego, your biggest enemy, your biggest friend. And again, so I would love to learn more in our own scriptures. When I say the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Mahabharata, the Gita, Chanakya, and
Right.
there's so
Right.
much. So
So,
I would love to learn more.
yeah.
I love to play the flute, the Indian classical flute.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
Last 7, 8 months, I'm not getting the time to do that, but I do have my Guruji who comes and teaches me regularly. So I'd love to do that more.
Okay.
And I'd love to
Okay.
just keep on writing.
Sure, sure, sure. So, what stands out for me is that all the three things are in the domain of curiosity and art somewhere, right?
Yeah,
Whether it's playing the flute or the scriptures and the depth to which you want to go and writing. So
yeah,
it's almost seems like this is the realm which is endless. One can always
absolutely.
have more to do. There's
Absolutely.
always room to hone more, do more, experience
Correct.
more.
Correct.
Wonderful, Ashutosh. I think that was a beautiful,
There
beautiful
is one
answer
other
there.
aspect that we are now working on, and I'm sure we'll get you involved, and that is the Renaissance Executive Forums,
Yeah, yeah,
where again, that's a way to give back a lot of learnings that I have had over the years to a
yes,
lot of other leaders who can come
yes,
together and
yes.
chat with us. So
Yes,
that's another area that we are exploring.
yes, yes. No, absolutely, absolutely. And I do see a lot of value in those forums as well.
Mm,
And of course, I
mm,
think we'll talk about it separately as
correct.
well. Probably
Absolutely.
another episode will be dedicated
Certainly.
on that.
Absolutely.
But thank you so much for talking
Thank
to
you.
me today. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I truly feel that probably we need one more episode to capture all that
Happy to.
wealth of experience that you have to offer. But thank you so much for being a part of the show today and
Thank
being
you,
on the
Aditi.
guest chair and not the host chair.
Thank you, Aditi, for inviting me. I truly enjoyed my conversation with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Have a great day.
You too.
All right.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.